Okay, that looks promising. There we go. So we are being live streamed now. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. My name's Sophia Gerety and I'm from B&T. And today I'm joined by judges for the Gerety Awards. I have to say, absolutely no relation. I'm not related to the Gerety Awards. I've been in this industry, been in Australia 6 months. Live streamed now. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. My name's Sophia Gerety and I'm from B&T. There you go. Yeah, so really excited to be joined today by some of the judges, and we will be talking through the awards. And like I say, absolutely no relation at all. The Gerety Awards are really unique in that it's an all-female jury. So to get kind of that female perspective on some of the top adverts from both this region, Australia, New Zealand, and the world. So with that, I'm going to ask my jury members who are joined here today to introduce themselves and talk about one advert from the judging this year that really stood out for them. So I'm going to start with yourself, Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Pick and I'm the Group Executive Creative Director for VML New Zealand. So I was the ambassador and on the jury this year for the Gerety Awards. And one that stood out for me from the region was the UN Women Australia Equality, Our Final Frontier. That was a spot that really resonated because some of the facts in it I knew, but I'd never had them presented to me in that way before.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kim. And now I'm going to hand over to Leah Morris.
Hi everyone, my name's Leah. I'm a senior copywriter with RGA Australia and the founder of Mavens, which is a online platform to champion women in advertising. So I'm really happy to be part of this jury. One campaign that really stood out to me, it's not from the region, but Hang Up On It for Motorola was just a really clever use of a unique selling point, which is that of their flip phone, the Razor. And they created a super ownable gesture for that, which they campaigned out across social media through TikTok, memes, and all sorts of other digital placements to tackle online hate, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, especially if you're my age, which I'm sad to be old enough now, with the Razor. I remember when I was 11, the Razor was the coolest thing you could have. Like, you were literally the coolest person in the school in the UK if you had a Razor. So nice to see it brought back. Non-fundo, next.
Yeah, I'm Nomfundo Msomi. I'm head of strategy at White Grey, based in Melbourne, which is why I'm wearing a turtleneck because it's freezing this morning. It's very difficult to pick a favorite ad because there was just such a mixed bag of incredibly different entries this year, which was part of what was so exciting, kind of combing through them. There was serious issues and lighthearted issues and just plain fun. So in the spirit of that, I mean, I can't stop thinking about Burberry Night Creatures, and it is a hyper luxury brand, and it is a fantastical ad about a night in London where there are seemingly no people on the street, just a bunch of really interesting, cool people hanging out on the bus and chasing a fantastical creature into the Thames. I love it because it just is fantasy, and we've got a serious world out there, and it's just beautiful when fashion can actually do what fashion is meant to do. I think just take us into a world that isn't quite real, or like a hyper stylized version of our world. So love all the Burberry work that also kind of refashions what we imagine a Londoner to be like. It's a lot more diverse. It's a different kind of London than the one that you would imagine somebody in a Burberry coat or a trench coat would wear. It's clearly changing in front of our eyes. So I just love that. I think it was a beautiful piece of film, well crafted, and so fun to watch.
Yeah, I think high fashion does take itself quite seriously. I think there's adverts in magazines with people in poses that I don't think I've ever seen a single person do in real life, which look grossly uncomfortable. Last but not least, Vicky.
Hi guys, I'm Vicky. I'm a senior director at FCB Aotearoa. Not going to lie, it's my first time judging, so I'm a bit nervous, but I didn't actually say much at the panel because everyone was just so smart and they pretty much said what I wanted to say, but in a way more articulate way. My favourite campaign was actually Follow the Leader for the Non-Violence Project Foundation. I just love how it hijacked the IG algorithm, but in a positive way. And it was such an innovative approach, because I find it quite interesting how it kind of subverted the negative impact of buying fake followers, but kind of redirected it into something positive. I think it really gives me the pleasure knowing maybe the hate groups would have been like, oh, I've got a bunch of new followers, but then boom, they get shut down. I think it really delivered a sense of poetic justice that I find quite satisfying for me personally. And I think for nonprofit organizations, it's really hard to do ads that are not too earnest and serious or a little bit too worthy. And I think this campaign just really strikes that nice balance, and it really breaks the stereotype, particularly in that category.
I really like that. And we're going to start talking about ads from the region. And both Vicky and Nonfundo talked there about, how adverts can be really serious. And it was actually really nice to have these like light-hearted ads. We did have, so the ones, if we talk about the ones from the region, we had the Maybelline Through Their Eyes, UN Women, Equality, Our Final Frontier. And then we also had the evidence done from Crime Stoppers, which they're all like quite serious topics, right? We're talking about, women being abused on the internet. We're talking about female equality, and we're also talking about crime, which doesn't get much more serious. I mean, what were some of the discussions around these adverts? I mean, did you sort of feel like they did create impact?
We, as a jury, we went through well over 100 entries from around the world, but some of them, and they were from the region and also globally. So we were really talking about the ones that stood out to us, or debating any issues around them that were sort of for or against why they ought to be shortlisted or go on to win. So there definitely was a lot of discussion around, Maybelline Through Their Eyes, as well as UN Women Australia, the Equality, Our Final Frontier. So yeah, there were pros and cons to both of these. And did you want us to go into some of the discussions around these?
Yeah, I think that would be great, because I mean, I've watched both the adverts and quite powerful, but obviously, like, it sounds like the moderator, the judges are quite divided. So what were some of the pros, and what were some of the things people didn't like about these adverts?
Well, maybe if we start with Maybelline Through Their Eyes, which overnight the shortlists have come out, by the way. So there's 300 and some shortlists in 42 countries for the Gerety Awards, and Maybelline Through Their Eyes has been shortlisted for Work for Good online video. And we were talking about it in this context. So what was interesting about Maybelline Through Their Eyes, and maybe this is where some of the discussion came about, was that female gamers, or female identifying gamers, this actually wasn't the only piece of work in play that was exploring this subject. And in fact, there was another piece which is also shortlisted, which was Gender Swap Women in Games, that's come out of France. So in a way, there was a little bit of discussion around, is this a new view? Are we just making people aware now that there is misogyny in gaming? And so a little bit to talk about what this piece is. It's actually a very simple social experiment, and we've seen social experiments before, but some male gamers are given a voice switch, which gives them a higher pitch so that they sound more female. And we just film, or the case study films what happens just in the next few seconds and the way they're responded to. Now, I personally found this shocking and upsetting, distressing, that there could be such hate towards female or female identifying gamers. However, some of our other panelists didn't find this as surprising at all. So I'd be curious from some of the other jury about their views on this one.
Yeah, definitely. So who, I can see our jury members here, I have, just for the sake of tech, them to go on mute, but who really liked this advert? If you can physically or technologically raise your hand. So Kim really liked it. Anyone else really pro this advert? Leah, okay, Leah, what did you like about this advert?
I think one of the biggest challenges with any kind of gender equality awareness is involving men in the conversation. And, with the sort of stuff that I do on my side hustle, like that's always something that's front of mind. It's like onboarding those allies that are sort of like poised to join us in understanding the experiences of women and improving them. And I think this campaign did it really well. And to Kim's point, France also did something similar, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think every country needs its culturally relevant version of that. And I think the execution was really beautifully done by Hero.
It's an interesting view because I think we're, especially with creative industries, it's all like originality. If someone's done this before, it's been done already, but actually you're sort of saying, well, if it gets through to different audience members and it's tailored to each different region, and it works, then why not have that? Which is a fair point. Vicky and Nonfundo, your hands didn't go up when I said who liked this advert. I don't know if you just didn't get there in time or you weren't so sure about it. So if I start with you, Nonfundo, I mean, what were some of your thoughts on this advert?
Well, I agree. I mean, the execution is excellent, and that we all have an incredible amount of empathy for people who create work in our industry, because we know that it's really challenging to get great work out. And so I feel like that's my disclaimer for sure. Like, kudos to any team that's able to get that out. I think what I find kind of frustrating and difficult, just generally, as a Black woman in the world and a woman who's committed to ensuring that there is equality in action, is who is centered and who is the content actually for. And sometimes I find re-traumatizing, and I'm sure the women who were who participated in the the phrase that you used, I think, Kim, was female identifying, but yeah, I'm sure that they were not happy to be re-exposed to issues that they already know. And that doesn't mean that, the outcome isn't great in terms of, Leah's point when it comes to onboarding allies. I think that's really important. But I'm always so keen to see when we move on to the next phase of things, and when the kind of onus is on men not to be exposed and shocked over and over again the reality of being a woman in the world, because we live that experience. And I think all marginalized identities feel that way. That's like, okay, I suppose I'll talk about racism now again. But when is the point when we can move on, and when we can express our kind of experiences a bit differently? I know that obviously the UN Women ad is relevant to show that it's not going to be until how many centuries from now, until we're on Mars, that equality exists. But I'm always keen for a brighter view, and one where other folks take a little bit of the weight and decide to do it. What kind of content would it have been if Maybelline had approached men and kind of put the onus on action and the experience on them a bit differently? I find sometimes as well, I think one of the themes that I saw in the ads is that the world of the experiences of women can be quite dark in the way that we sort of paint what we go through. And again, I think that's because we're exposing people to inequality for the first time, and it's that element of shock. But again, I'd like to leap over, the body of water and get to the part where we just get to talk about the positive things, or try to find the positive spin on what it's like to be a woman, because it isn't all dark and gloomy. So I hope that makes sense. Again, I think it's a really well-crafted piece. I just wondered who it was for. It's clear it was for men to sort of expose them or shock, and maybe some women who aren't gamers. But it feels like, constantly kind of re-exposing people to things that are really negative. When are we going to move on from that approach?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic as well, because it's that, I know you had a discussion in the judging about awareness and action, and it is that kind of like shock awareness, but then it's, I remember that film, Promising Young Women, that came out a few years ago, like with the Me Too themes. And I remember watching that and just feeling so triggered and so shaken and so unhappy. And, I was like, I wish, not to give it away, but yeah, I wish there'd been a happier ending, or, just rather than that. So, yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Is that the way to go in with the really big trigger and shock, or is it that kind of more things that leave people feeling a bit good sort of thing? Coming to you finally, Vicky, what were your views on this advert?
I actually really loved it, but I did see another campaign that was quite similar and brought it up in the discussion, and everyone kind of convinced me actually what was that gut feeling that I had. And because I initially loved it, so I gave it a pretty good score. For me, it's kind of like, I find, say, in a Western context, like certain campaigns might feel a little maybe regressive or unnecessary, because we might think, oh, are we still doing an awareness job here? But I guess the idea of gender equality might not be as universally linear as we think. To Leah's point, I think like different regions have distinct cultural, social, or historical background that kind of shape our understanding to what gender roles are, and it's quite important for us to acknowledge and appreciate, I guess, the diversity and approaches made by different regions and creatives around the world.
Yeah, I guess it is that interesting. I mean, I don't know if anyone's got views on this to answer, but it's, you know, both these, the UN Women and Maybelline, a lot kind of around creating that awareness. And I guess it's something, you know, are we at that stage when most people do acknowledge like sexism and racism does exist, and now it's more like, how can we stop that? How can we undo that and sort of change things? Or do we still need these kind of like awareness campaigns to kind of show people that these things exist? Whoever wants to answer that.
I would jump in on that one. And for me, the one compelling thing for me about the Maybelline Through Their Eyes was the 449 million impressions for the work and reaching 65 million gamers. To me, the scale of that and the audience is reached. And I absolutely agree with the points of the fellow panelists too about who they were talking to. But if this was a matter of converting some of those gamers through feelings of shame or through self-disappointment or recruiting more allies, I thought there was a job to be done with the campaign, and particularly coming from a brand like Maybelline, which as a beauty brand previously with a strapline, maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's Maybelline, which feels very sort of an outside observer looking at a female in a very sort of third person aspect, to actually come in and explore what life is like through a female lens. I think was an interesting switch for Maybelline, and I gave it points for that as well. Yes, so certainly it is in the awareness space, but also I think if there was any action taken, it was around through creating allies and awareness.
I think Kim makes a really good point about audience. Like, I'm aware of a statistic, I think it was in the last census, or it might have been the ABC, that 1 in 2 Australian men don't think that women face more adversity in society. So if that's the audience that we're speaking to, awareness is absolutely where we should be. But typically, action-driven campaigns will resonate with me more in this space. But I think, yeah, given the audience, this is probably the right approach.
So sort of similar to Non-Fundo's point where she said, you know, who's this for? Are you know, you mentioned, and Leah, I know you mentioned at the beginning, sort of getting men on board, which is really important. It seems like this gaming sort of advert was more sort of maybe angled to men and, you know, showing them this is an issue rather than for women themselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with, again, fellow panelists on the need for awareness, because I think, unfortunately, we also find ourselves in situations where we need to fall back on data, statistics, and examples because our lived experience often isn't enough, or people think that our lived experience is a form of bias. And so the more examples we can have out there in the world that, you know, point to hard data, the easier it is to have these conversations sometimes if you find them difficult. So did you know, that 65% of women X, Y, Z, or did you know? So to your point, Leah, even if it's 1 in 2 men in Australia are like, what are you talking about? The more that's out there to be like, well, did you see that thing or did you hear that thing, is obviously helpful to make that case. So awareness still incredibly important for sure.
Yeah, as you mean. So it's like we shouldn't, people saying it should be enough, but actually data, it makes it, what's the word? It sort of translates it for everyone, where you could like tangibly be like, no, this isn't imagined. This is a real issue. I want to touch, we haven't spoken about it too much. We've sort of talked about it briefly a bit, but the UN Women advert, Equality Our Final Frontier, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Frontier. It's one of them words. I hope so. Who was a really big fan of this advert? Kim's like, yeah. In fact, all of you, everybody, I don't think Leah put her hand up. That's fine. I like, yeah, not sure. I like to disagree. So all of you are a big fan of this one. If I start maybe with Vicky and then come to Kim on this. So what did you really like about this?
I loved how it was beautifully crafted. I think the artistry, the attention to detail, it really stood out for me, and particularly the communications category. I don't know, I just feel like there's a sense of authenticity because the spot, like the idea is actually quite simple, but it was done in such a powerful and concise way. It really captured my attention personally. And I kind of like watched the spot throughout and didn't really know what it was about. And I just loved that gut punch moment in the end. And I think that gave me that gut feeling that it was a good ad because it kind of made a lasting impression for me.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because I think sometimes there's pressure to be like, oh, you have to know straight from the beginning what this is and what's it about. And you're actually like intrigued enough to kind of watch it and be like, oh, what's going on here? And sort of, and then have that at the end. So it's maybe a little bit of more of a gentle taking you on a journey than the Maybelline one, potentially. What about yourself, Kim?
I think what I liked about it is it dealt with a fact that I knew, which is, I think it's going to be at least 132 years before we see gender equality based on progress in society at the moment. But I think juxtaposing that against other progress, we'll actually live on the moon, we'll walk on Mars before we reach gender equality. And I think having that played out in a beautiful storytelling way, with a lovely song, quite a plaintive, poignant song, Beautiful Dreamer, that made it feel like an impossible dream, but also projecting these relatable moments in the sort of decades and sort of century or so ahead was really sad. I mean, like the overall feeling of that was, I suppose it left you feeling, is it even possible? What can be done? You hope that a spot like this will, prod people into action. But certainly for me, it was an emotionally charged way of telling a story and replaying a fact I knew, but in a way I hadn't experienced before.
And Nonfundo, I know you were mentioning, because this advert, as Kim just said, it was truthful, it's all these facts of things that were achieved before equality, but it was that truth in a I guess a much more gentler way rather than sort of being very sort of triggering. Did you find, did you prefer this method of truthful storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly emotional piece. I remember I was quite moved the first time that I saw it, and being relatively new to Australia, the sign that says when will she be right, I think was a real gut punch, as you said, because in my lifetime, never. I mean, I think the UN is, they do great advocacy work. They obviously also do action-oriented work on the ground through like UNICEF or UNHCR. UN Women does a ton of work, I'm sure, but I think part of their job is advocacy, raising awareness of issues. So I know that they definitely have to walk that line. That isn't too jarring, that doesn't isolate anybody. They call in rather than call out, if that makes sense. So I think that they did a great job in this case. Again, at the end, I'm left thinking, so what can I do now? But and sadly, the answer is kind of nothing. Apart from try to be somebody who advocates for and supports other women in my life. But the craft of it, I think, again, if it's about creating that emotional sort of message that really speaks to people, it ticked all the boxes. The near future perspective, some of the similar like motifs and maybe even brands that you might recognize, I won't call any out, that are sort of alluded to, I think, in the film too, that makes us think like this is actually our world as we know it. And it's our world in the near future there's something really alarming about it. So the combination of the alarming kind of horrifying reality that's unfolding, plus the progress, as Vicky said, that's like these things are all kind of celebrated. And they're so over the top, like living on other planets, having an AI generated, I don't know what it was called, kindergarten. There are all these strange things in the robots, and the simple fact of being a woman and having a sort of equal experience is just, it's not part of the future, it was frightening and beautiful. I hope that I'm being clear. I loved it. I thought it was really, 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 really well done. Super well crafted.
And Leah, you seem to disagree with these. Everyone, not to put you on the spot. What for you, why wasn't this a kind of, you did this, why wasn't it like a...
It was more like an undecided thing.
Yeah.
Like the craft was stunning. Is one of the most visually beautiful ads I've seen in a long time. The storytelling was exceptional. I loved watching it. It made me feel so hopeless though. And I think that feeling that I got from it is what is putting me on the fence about it. It kind of felt like it was preaching to the converted a little bit, and that it lacked that rigor around the call to action at the end that I would have loved to see on a topic I'm so passionate about. So I loved it, but at the same time, I can't say that I thought it was one of my favorite pieces, just because I was left wanting a bit more action.
On that, I'm aware, so we've got 5 minutes left. It's gone sadly very quickly. I think on the call to action, I mean, I was hoping to get to the global one, but as Kim said, hundreds of entries. We only got half an hour, so not to get through them all. But there was this one which we're talking about, I think, before the call started, which was a bit divided on, and this was also Australia. So this was the evidence dump Crime Stopper one, and this was encouraging, I believe, more young people in Victoria to report crimes to the police, and this was very action focused in terms of the adverts very much like, you can just do this. I don't know if you can do it via TikTok, or they were just showing how to do it on TikTok, but basically the call to action was, it's very easy to report crime, do it. I mean, what did people think of this one? Because this was a very clear action one.
I'd love for Vicky or Nomfundo to actually start and talk about this one, because they made some awesome comments during the judging. But to me, this was fantastic about making the old-fashioned phone-in so archaic, and this being an entirely new way to report crime. But go for it, guys.
Do you want to jump in, Vicky? I'm happy to. Yeah, I mean, I loved this. I thought it was great. The video storytelling piece in terms of how it came together was hilarious. I think there's a lot of responsibility if all of a sudden you believe that crime is sitting in your camera roll, and it can be potentially a little problematic. That's like, what if it's just somebody that you deem to be, skeptical in some way, that it can be a bit strange. But I think that's what crime reporting always is. I think the challenges, or maybe the kind of more problematic aspects, seem more intense now that we have all this access to technology. But I think that's always been a mechanism. That's like, this may or may not be. I'm reporting on my gut instinct, and this is just kind of a modern way to do that, as you say, Kim. So I thought it was great, really well done, and just encourages people to participate in a bit of a different way. It definitely it changes your perception of Crime Stoppers too, which I would imagine feels like quite an archaic, old, slow way to, to create action in your community. So love the use of media. And again, the insight there that we're, potentially recording crimes every day, because we're recording so much, moving footage on our phones. I thought it was excellent.
And Vicky?
For me, I'm a bit on the fence for this one, because I love TikTok. I spend way too much time on it. I personally really love the mechanic. I think it was great use of media, as Nom said. But my issue was the tone. I'm not too sure if it kind of trivialized crime. Like, for me, it's a tonal thing that I wasn't sure of.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think it's like Nomfundo was saying, it's everyone could potentially report crime. It turns us all into like miniature policemen, as policemen and policewomen and things like that. But then I guess this was quite targeted at teenagers potentially, and it's especially, you could just be like, oh, that person looks dodgy, like they don't like the way they walk and things like that. Which obviously it is a serious thing if anyone gets accused of anything.
I found the tone incredibly annoying, and I think that was really because it's targeted at Gen Z. They had copywriting, the copywriter had written lines like, reporting crime is giving main character energy, which was super silly. But I can see how that would resonate with that audience, and I think it was brilliant.
Yeah, the over the topness, I think, for me, really that sort of, it was excellent. I mean, I've heard, someone say, like, if the Swifties, directed their investigative energies towards climate change, we would solve all the problems in the world. If there's standums out there, you can find every little thing. You're like, there's an Easter egg in the Beyonce concert. So, I just thought that as an insight is really funny. That's like, wow, turning that same instinct to being like, let's analyze. Like, if you zoom in, you can see she's wearing a butterfly on her shoe, and that means that she's going to fly away, whatever it is. I think that they kind of got onto that sort of behavioral instinct in a really funny way. And again, it walked a super thin line, Lee. I agree with the tone. You're like, but also it's so ridiculous and over the top that it can't possibly be real, at least the way that
it's good.
It was delivered. Yeah.
So we're at time now. I think we've got about a minute left. I'm going to come to you all really quickly. You can't go into detail on it, I'm afraid, because we don't have time. But just one advert we haven't mentioned that people should watch. So I'm going to start how you're on screen. Start with you, Leah. One advert people should watch.
Shout by Movie Star Telecommunications was a long form piece of craft that was entered into pretty much every craft category and shortlisted for pretty much every craft category for good reason, tackling homophobia through a narrative around boxing in Mexico. Just beautiful.
Perfect. And Kim?
Hopefully not stealing anyone else's thunder, but follow their leader, the Non-Violence Project Foundation. Just it has been mentioned earlier, followers to hate speech websites and shutting them down through technicality when they wouldn't be shut down for their hate speech, which seemed like a fantastic judo move from this organisation.
Thank you. And non-fundo?
The glitch for me from the Alzheimer Forschung Initiative in Germany, a beautiful piece showing the experience of what it's like to have Alzheimer's, which has been described as having a glitch in the brain. They use this gorgeous data moshing technique to show what those glitches are like. It's from a first person perspective. It's incredibly, incredibly well done. I encourage everybody to watch that one.
And finally, Vicky?
I'm with Kim. I really love their Follow the Leader campaign, and I just love the sense of guerrillaness and cheekiness. It really feels super refreshing, particularly for the category. I also think there's a bigger piece beyond that idea, because it's almost like a social commentary on the influence of like social media and the algorithm. So I highly recommend that piece.
Thank you. That's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for our judges for joining me today. Thank you for watching, and the shortlist is out today, so you can check that out.